Abrams train is coming in.
Yeah.
That's poetic. A new train.
On Ms. Abrams' primary election day in Georgia is rapidly approaching, before we have an official opponent, we want to input this grassroots team on everything we can to do to enter the general election. Reaching this critical goal will put us on track for victory in November and on track to deliver progress for Georgians. It is important that our grassroots team encourage everyone to vote for Ms. Stacey Abrams because she is the one for Georgia.
City of Brunswick, I'm glad that the weather is awesome today, and I'm glad that Brunswick is on the radar. Once again, let's give a very Brunswick warm welcome to Stacey Abrams.
I appreciate it, but I'm good. I grew up in the sun. We're good. I want to say thank you again to the extraordinary young women who introduced me. And I want to say thank you to Mayor Cosby Johnson for welcoming me here to Commissioner Roll. A place a lot like this. I grew up on the Gulf of Mexico in Mississippi. So I remember the 3 days when the weather was like this. Right before summer started all over again. But I also remember growing up in a place that didn't always remember who we were. You see, Gulfport is a long way from Jackson, Mississippi. And when we moved from Mississippi to Georgia in 1989, when my parents were called into the ministry, we lived in Atlanta, but not the city. We lived in Decatur. And it was amazing how far Decatur was from power. See, you lived on one of those streets where politicians never knocked on your door. We lived in one of those communities where services could rarely find you. But one of the services that my family took advantage of was public transportation. It was a necessity because my parents, while they were in grad school, much like the time before they became pastors, we were working poor. I grew up, my mom was a librarian and my dad was a shipyard worker, and they decided to go for permanent poverty by becoming ministers. So we moved from Mississippi to Georgia to Emory University and get their master's in divinity. Yes. It was during that time that I graduated from a public high school in Georgia. I graduated from DeKalb County Public Schools. And I had the honor of being valedictorian. That was 30 years ago, but I'm still proud of myself. When I graduated as valedictorian, one of the perks of being valedictorian in Georgia is that you get invited to the governor's mansion. Now, I was excited about this, less because I was going to meet the governor, and more because I watched a lot of Dynasty and wanted to go to a mansion. And so that Sunday morning when I was going to meet the governor, going to meet my fellow students who had also achieved the status of valedictorian, my parents and I, we didn't go outside and get in our car because we didn't have one. My parents couldn't afford a car. Instead, we got on MARTA, the public transit system in Atlanta. We took that bus from Decatur all the way to Buckhead to West Paces Ferry. We got off that bus in our Sunday finest. My mother had her purse. I had on heels that were just a little too tall. And my father, when we walked across West Stacey Road, we walked up the sidewalk and then the driveway to get to the guard station so we could check in. And we were careful to walk along the side because there were cars coming up, cars driving in, family members from across the state, bringing their proud children with them to celebrate their success, to celebrate the success that we see in Dahlia and Kiera and Milo, the success that we want to cultivate in all of our children. And when we get to that guard gate, I'm beaming because I know I'm in an important place. And the guard comes out and looks at me, looks at my parents, and he says, "This is a private event. You don't belong here." Now, my father says, no, this is my daughter Stacey. She's one of the valedictorians, but the guard doesn't check his checklist. He doesn't look at the piece of paper that lists who is supposed to be here. Instead, I remember distinctly him looking over our shoulder at the bus that's pulling away, taking nurses to their second shifts, taking janitors to their Sunday jobs, taking family members to meet their obligations. He sees that bus pulling off and makes a decision about who should be in that governor's mansion. And we didn't fit that description. Now, I can't tell you what was in his heart, but I can tell you what was on his lips. He said, again, this is a private event. You don't belong here. Now, as I mentioned, my parents moved us here because they were in divinity school. They were studying to become pastors, but they were not ministers yet. And so they had a very engaged discussion with the gentleman at the gate. My father may have mentioned where he was going to spend eternity if he didn't find my name on that list. And after some, excited discussion, he found my name and he let us in. And the thing of it is, as I look at those extraordinary young women, I look and see young people in this audience. You have these moments of grace that are visited upon you. I don't remember that day meeting the governor. I don't remember meeting the governor of Georgia at all. I don't remember my fellow valedictorians. I don't know what canapes they served, what was in. There were drinks that we had. All I remember is a man standing in front of the most powerful place in Georgia and telling me I don't belong. I'm running for governor to open those gates wide to every citizen in Georgia, to every person in Georgia, every child in Georgia. Because this is our state, and there is one Georgia, and we all belong there. See, I grew up in Mississippi, and when I was in college at Spelman College, I focused my thesis as a college student on environmental justice. Because you see, justice, as Dahlia said, is something that is core to who I am. I was raised by people who were civil rights activists as teenagers. My father got arrested when he was 14, trying to register black people to vote in Mississippi. We like to tease him that my mom did the same work. She just managed not to get caught. But they raised me to believe that you just don't talk about what you want. You do the work. So as a college student, when I decided to focus on environmental justice, I managed to get myself an internship with the Environmental Criterion and Assessment Office in North Carolina. You see, I'm not a scientist by training, that's my youngest sister. But I wanted to understand what was happening in our communities, in black and brown communities, in poor communities, in disregarded communities. Because poison doesn't ask what color you are. Extreme weather events don't care what your affluence is. And so I worked for the EPA for a summer in North Carolina, and I did such a good job that the following year I was brought up to the big leagues. I worked for the Environmental Protection Agency in Washington, D.C. for the newly created Office of Environmental Justice. Because this matters to me. And I took that with me when I went to the state legislature. During my time there, I worked hard to defend our communities. And the thing of it is, I know this isn't a partisan issue. You see, one of my greatest accomplishments in the legislature was stopping a bill that the Chamber of Commerce and the governor and the lieutenant governor and the speaker wanted for several years. And I didn't do it because I had enough people. See, I was the minority that came in Ohio. Jan Brewer expanded Medicaid in Arizona, and these may be names you don't remember because they did it years ago. Georgia has spent 10 years saying no to helping its people. Governor Kemp has spent 4 years saying, I don't care. And we know he doesn't care because it's not about the money. Georgia is entitled to $3.5 billion. $3.5 billion that will come into our community in 2022. $3.5 billion to save that hospital that's shutting down in East Point, where a man who survived a stroke a few years ago would cherish if makes it happen today. We need a hospital in Cuthbert, Georgia, where a nurse who used to work there had to tell me the story about her Aunt Parrish because the ambulance couldn't take her to Alabama.